The plebs have revolted to my tyrannical rule. Now we have the worst galactic civil war since the days of the Horus Heresy. Don't you know? I need new troops.
Indeed, sir. How about tough jungle fighters?
No, a bunch of sweaty guys hanging around the tropics. Sounds a little dubious to me.
What about suicidal Germans?
No, they give me an existential crisis, as I'm reminded of my own mortality.
What about attractive ladies in nun outfits and big metal bosoms?
Okay, so 7 reasons why the Sisters of Battle are the best faction in 40k. St. Joan of Arc is awesome, and she's a major inspiration for the Sisters of Battle. It's obvious from the symbolism used, and not to mention the uncanny resemblance. The mystique and the glory surrounding the saint is then somewhat inherited by the Sisters of Battle, who are a homage, and the Sisters of Battle are a sort of modern iteration of the saint in an abstract sense. They are kind of the manifestation of the perception of how people nowadays see St. Joan, which means the things that make St. Joan of Arc so powerful in our imagination are similar to the things that make this holy order of warrior nuns that fight heretics so appealing as well.
Reason 2. They keep the faith.
They are dedicated to the defense of faith in men's hearts and civilization, and faith is arguably the most important element in civilization, because civilization itself is an abstract concept that requires faith. It's an invisible network based on things you can't really touch, like credibility, loyalty, justice, duty, rights, etc. Yes, the effects of civilization are indeed things you can touch and feel and measure, such as our human-built majestic spires that reach into the heavens, or incredible technological devices that connect the whole world, or poisonous chemicals infecting the water supply, which are leading to an apocalyptic decline in the fertility of men's sperm. Wait, what? Anyway, without abstract ideas, be they religious or secular, you can't motivate or justify human action on a large scale. You can't have a delicate network of human relationships to mobilize large-scale and coordinated human actions, without notions of liberty, equality, God, etc. This is especially true for a galaxy-spanning empire that involves trillions of star systems, light years away from each other, where the interaction between all these different planets takes an inordinate amount of time. And it's especially true in a universe where abstract concepts like lust, anger, etc. are personified forces in alternate dimensions, where thoughts and feelings produce actual demonic beings that terrorize the galaxy and tempt people to do the most horrible abominations. Especially in a reality where a lust demon was murdered into existence by a degenerate alien race. Pardon my French. In the Warhammer 40k universe, faith is therefore a shield against tangible destructive forces, which are the main threat to mankind. And in the grim darkness of the far future, only through faith can you endure the chaos. Therefore, the Sisters of Battle defend the source of the Imperium's ability to defend itself. Its very raison d'être, if you will. Pardon my French again. For real this time. And the Sisters of Battle are basically the most faithful out of all the different factions of the Imperium. With this faith gives them an unbelievable power in their duty. Sure, they might not be so tolerant by our current historical era standards, but when faced with several existential threats, and when certain ideas and concepts literally become personified demons, tolerance takes a back seat, you know what I mean? And it's important to note again that even in our world, civilization is a set of abstract values, and common faith in those values from the people is what fuels the civilization itself. So I'll end this argument with a quote on the nature of human society. Any organization is partly fictive, in that it depends on the conviction amongst those who engage with it that it really exists. The organization is sustained because each individual acts in expectation that others will behave similarly. Symbols and rituals provide markers for participants, helping to sustain the belief in the organization's continued existence. The organization is threatened if its symbols lose their meaning or are challenged. Likewise, an organization risks being exposed as fictive if it no longer meets common expectations. For example, if the anticipated repression fails to materialize, or is exposed as feeble when a government is confronted with open defiance. Peter H. Wilson, The Holy Roman Empire, 1,000 Years of Europe's History. All this to say, if you mess with the nun, you get the gun. Capiche?
Reason 3. They represent the best of mankind.
Within the lore, they are generally incorruptible in every sense of the word. They're basically immune to the temptations of demons, and their faith makes them capable of overcoming great obstacles with literal miracles. But beyond that, they're also basically incorruptible when it comes to imperial intrigue and old-school political corruption, making them genuinely righteous within the web of terrible people that make up the vast majority of the Imperium's hierarchy. And this is because moral corruption is in itself derived from lack of faith in morality itself. The Sisters of Battle have an unyielding moral discipline and an indestructible need for personal excellence. They are self-sacrificing, brave, and dutiful to a fault, all things humanity needs in its most dire moments. And they represent these qualities more than basically any other faction that I can think of, with the possible exception of the Grey Knights, and maybe some other Space Marine chapters. Yet the Sisters of Battle better represent the best of humanity, even more so than the transhuman mutant demigod fighting machines transformed by futuristic technology and space magic, because the Sisters are in fact still human, which the Space Marines technically are not anymore. Sure, these ladies have the best military equipment and training, but they are still just flesh and faith, which means that in the end, they represent the best of humanity, while the Space Marines represent what humanity can become. The two concepts are not exactly the same. Reason 4. They actually make sense. One of the best things about the Sisters of Battle is that they actually make sense as an all-female warrior force. It's well explained why it was necessary for them to come to existence, by necessity to circumvent a legal limitation which forbade any men at arms for the ecclesiarchy. That alone is a nice little explanation for an all-female force, since in reality women are generally less capable in combat. But this little detail in the lore explains it pretty well. You combine this with technological development of the far future, and intense training, and you can pretty much believe that their limitations could be overcome, and that it's not hard to believe that they could excel in combat, even against terrible monstrosities. The thing is, the Imperium has no shortage of human beings, and no threat of severe populational decline, as far as I know, which usually forces a society to prevent women from fighting so they can keep the stability of their population, as I explained in this video. Feel free to watch it when you have the time, and if you like Avatar. Anyway, this means that a massive female monastic order with one branch for female warriors is not really a big risk for a civilization. But the most important thing is their training. They're taken from birth and taught severe religious discipline, and it's well documented in real life that this increases excellence and discipline, as well as personal health and strength, etc. Therefore, it's not that big of a stretch to think that a religious order of women could produce formidable warriors who transcend their limitations and become formidable in the battlefield. Their Templar/Spartan upbringing and combined sci-fi tech makes it pretty believable in my opinion. Which is why I think that the hyper-religious and hyper-disciplined warrior maidens of the Warhammer 40k universe are actually kind of cool, and not cringy like you see in other franchises. Anyway, moving on.
Reason 5. They're pretty.
No horny! The Sisters of Battle are by far the best looking faction in this universe. No question. And if you disagree with that, then there's probably something wrong with you, or you're into Eldar chicks, which is heresy! Don't get me wrong, the neo-gothic aesthetic in Warhammer is pretty gorgeous, and the diesel punk style of the Mechanicum is pretty epic. And as cool as the Space Marines are, a friend of mine is actually right when he says that they have a severe case of the hamburger aesthetics, as he calls it. It's when everything looks morbidly obese because it adopts the horizontally obsessed dimensions of a hamburger. I mean, look at these two. Tell me you don't see a resemblance. A Space Marine is basically just a hamburger with legs and a gun. Compare this with the awe-inspiring beauty of a non-butchified Sister of Battle, and there's really no competition. Also, their heavenly elegance is a breath of fresh air in a universe populated by things that look like this. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Le montage of ugly femmes. And it's precisely this juxtaposition, produced by the beauty of the sisters in comparison to the monstrosities they fight, that reveals the struggle between life, health, order, and all things represented by beauty, against death, corruption, and decay, which is generally represented by ugliness. Reason 6. They capture the imagination. Not in a lewd way, though, mind you. The fact that they are beautiful women also reminds us that they are the future of humanity, as women carry the next generation. To see them fight against the enemies of mankind is inherently hope-inducing. And this is one major reason for why they're so inspiring for the normal guardsmen that fight alongside them in battle, because to witness the struggle of these war maidens against their enemies is to be reminded of what they're fighting for. And Heinlein, the renowned science fiction author, and one of the inspirations for 40k, explains this beautifully. I quote, "Do you know of a surer way to keep a man keyed up to the point where he is willing than by keeping him constantly reminded that the only good reason of why men fight is a living, breathing reality? In a mixed ship, the last thing a trooper hears before a drop, may be the last word he ever hears, is a woman's voice wishing him luck. If you don't think this is important, you've probably resigned from the human race." Starship Troopers, page 215. What is really intriguing about their beauty as women warriors is that feminine beauty emphasizes gentleness and is fragile looking. Therefore, there is something ethereal about a fragile looking and pretty woman standing her ground against monstrosities. It hints at the presence of a miraculous power, giving strength to her and therefore to humanity, whom she fights for, because only a miracle would be able to make something so fragile-looking so strong. A woman who remains beautiful, and there are many kinds of beauty, by the way, not just physical, within an ugly world, is a woman who hints at the existence of paradise. They remind men that there is some beauty and good in the universe, which is worth fighting for. Reason 7. They are extremely effective. As mentioned before, they are nearly incorruptible, which makes them among the most effective institutions within a dying and bloated imperium, with a laughably terrible and corrupt bureaucracy. The Sisters of Battle are just one branch of the larger female-run Adeptas Sororitas, which also provides hospital care and provides diplomatic services, as well as several other key functions within the Imperium, which means you can argue that they keep the Imperium as a whole together, and thus all of humanity. It's easy to laugh at the Sisters of Battle as a kind of diversity faction in a testosterone-filled galactic battle royale, or as mere eye candy for big burly neckbeards to have something to ogle at. As funny as these perceptions are, they're not true. The Sisters of Battle are organically part of this horror-filled universe. They don't feel tacked on or ideological in any way. For one thing, the Sisters of Battle have to be one of the most insanely patriarchal institutions ever conceived of in modern Western fiction. They are an entire female organization driven by the single purpose of praising and serving the will of the man-god who placed himself as the father of mankind, and that's exactly what the Sisters of Battle call him, and praise him as. These ladies throw themselves into a horrible meat grinder of a battlefield to protect the interests of the Imperium of Man. You don't see them saying crap like this.
Maternal love is the love that's going to change the future of mankind. So we'd like you to look
we like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive.
There we go, exactly.
So it's not like they were shoehorned in there to stick it to the patriarchy, you know what I'm saying? Also, they seem like generally strong women in their struggle to protect their church and their faith. Far from the untouchable Mary Sues we see these days. In all seriousness, the presence of true warrior women is not merely a gimmick for modern ideologies. They've been a real historical force in some of the most epic patriarchal societies that ever existed, from Princess Kutulun of the Mongols to that all-female samurai order that served in several battlefields in Japan, to, of course, Saint Joan of Arc herself from France. Granted, these women were exceptions, as they should be, because trying too hard to put women in general into combat is a horrible idea, since you'd have to lower the standards to make it possible for women to become a common sight in the battlefield, and because women should not be manipulated into facing the hell of war for mere political points just because it's trendy in our era to worship equality. Also, it's tragic that we live in an era where women are only valued if they take manly roles and have manly characteristics, and where femininity, and especially motherhood, is ignored when in reality motherhood is indeed the most important thing for mankind's future, and I firmly believe that women, as vessels for the future, are God's masterpiece. Unfortunately, a certain ideological persuasion that declares its desire to help women really just tells them to be like men instead of being valued for being women. However, that being said, respecting the fact that some women, even if very few, have indeed possessed a warrior vocation, is to respect the extraordinary. And the Sisters of Battle feel like an appropriate homage to the real warrior women of history. Even if civilizations can't be built on exceptions and only on rules, making room for the exceptions can remind us that miracles happen, which is the true appeal of Saint Joan of Arc, the main inspiration behind the Sisters of Battle. For God raises up the weak into a position of strength to remind the strong of where true strength comes from, that ethereal abstract realm only reachable through faith. Well, that's the video, guys. I hope you liked it. As you can see, we're still in a bit of a learning curve, but hopefully we're getting better each time until we finally find our groove. So yeah, this is the credits from where we got all the art. They'll also be down in the description. Also, as a bonus point here, I always thought it was very interesting how the Sisters of Battle, how they're very modest looking in their clothing generally. I mean, yeah, they have the big metal boobs that I joked about in the beginning of the video, but I always thought it was interesting how they don't rely on their carnal appeals, if you know what I mean, to become popular or anything like that. They just have such an interesting history, and they have such an interesting purpose within the Warhammer 40k universe, and that's pretty much enough. And I hope more franchises can understand that you don't really need to rely on sex appeal. And as much as I was, ragging on about how beautiful they are and whatever, and how interesting that is, they're not really naughty, if you know what I mean. And I think that's interesting. I think that's very wholesome in a otherwise not very wholesome universe, which I think is interesting. Anyway, yeah, that's just about it. Hope you liked the video, and see you next time.